Good evening and welcome to the annual Don Yoder Lecture. On behalf of my co-chair, Norma Prignano, and myself, Maggie Cruzy, we are delighted to welcome you all here this evening. It's my pleasure and really honor to introduce Henry Glassie as our speaker for the annual Don Yoder Lecture in Folk Belief and Religious Folklife. Henry Glassie is Emeritus Professor of Folklore at Indiana University. His honors include John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellow, Invited Fellow of the National Humanities Institute, New Haven, Fellow of the American Folklore Society, President, Vernacular Architecture Forum, Senior Research Associate, Museum of International Folklore Art, President of the American Folklore Society, and Teaching Excellence Recognition Award from Indiana University, among many others. As you know, he's the author of numerous books, including Pattern in the Material Folk Culture of the Eastern United States, which I recently reread as bedtime reading, Folk Housing in Middle Virginia, Passing the Time in Ballymaloe, The Spirit of Folk Art, Turkish Traditional Art Today, Art and Life in Bangladesh, Material Culture, The Potter's Art, Vernacular Architecture, his biography of Prince Twin 77, and many others. And he and Pravina Shukla have recently returned from Salvador, Bahia, Brazil, where they are documenting folk art, including the folk art of Cordell poets. But I always think first and foremost of Henry as a wonderful teacher and inspiration, and we're really delighted and honored that you're here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep, we're ready to go.
There's all this equipment that has to be right. I begin with a little touch of Italy to thank Leonard for providing me with this opportunity. Last year, Don Yoder, giving this very lecture name for him, made a distinction between Catholic and Protestant folk art. I am in this lecture going to build directly on Don's lecture last year. According to Don, he chose two classics of American folk art and used the Santo of New Mexico to represent Catholic creativity in an image. And he chose Pennsylvania Dutch Fraktur to represent Protestant creativity in a text. Image and text were the pair, the contrastive pair, that Don gave us to understand American folk art. What I intend to do is to take that contrastive pair that Don gave us, to travel over the world with that very pair, and to test it and have it reveal itself in different locations. The conclusion will be, are you finding it hard to hear? Okay. I want the machine to work, and so I can be heard all right? Yeah, fine. I just saw a signal from the back that I suppose was a call for a drink, but instead I misinterpreted it as a sign that I was either speaking too quietly or maybe even too loud. But nonetheless, I'm going to persist and tell you that the contrast that Don Yoder gave us last year, that contrast between text and image, is a contrast that most powerfully is revealed in world terms in the contrast between Hinduism and Islam. Hinduism is polymorphous. It lacks any central sacred text, and therefore Hinduism fills buoyantly and exuberantly with oral myths and with local rituals. All of those myths and all of those rituals center upon not a text, but an image. The image that you see before you is the image of Raksha Kali. It was made by my great pal Haripada Pal. It's in the Shakari Bazaar Kali Mandir. Islam is radically monotheistic. Islam has indeed a great central text. The consequence of that is that the highest art of Islam is the writing of holy texts. What you're looking at is an ayat from the Surah of Light in the Holy Quran. written in the Sulu script in the Istifli style by Yusuf Sezer in Istanbul. It is proverbial in Islam that the Quran was revealed in Arabia, interpreted in Egypt, and written in Turkey. Through his master Hamid Aytaç, Yusuf connects to 1,200 years of direct connection between great calligraphers in the Turkish tradition. Calligraphy centers an artistic system that might clumsily be called aniconic. Aniconic for the simple reason that the human image is rare and peripheral. It doesn't mean that it's absent, it just means that the human image is not central to the proposition of art in Islam. The supposition among us, whose art is so deeply implicated with the human figure, is that the only reason in the world that there could be an artistic tradition that eliminated the human figure would be because there's some prohibition in Islam against representation. It's just not true. In fact, there is no prohibition of representation in Islam at all. The only thing that the Holy Quran says is that it's unwise to worship a statue. Maybe not a bad idea, but nonetheless, it's certainly not a prohibition against representation. Not only is there no prohibition against representation, but it's a reliable hadith that the Prophet himself treasured above all things an icon of the Virgin Mary that was painted by St. Luke. Maryam being in Islam the perfect woman, just as her son Isa is a great prophet. Instead, interestingly enough, in Christianity, in the Bible, there's a very firm injunction against graven images. The fascinating thing is that there's no prohibition against images in Islam, and there are no images. But there is a prohibition against images in Christianity, and there are images galore. The first reason for this, it seems pretty logical, is the fact that God made man in his image. The second is that God came upon the earth as a man. Immediately, the proposition of the human body is invested with a kind of divine significance. Add to that the onflow of classical sculptural tradition in Rome, and what you have, curiously, in Christianity is a centrality of the image, and furthermore, from that centrality in Christianity, ultimately the Western artistic tradition almost favors above all things the human image. That image that you just saw, Rossellino's Madonna del Latte in Santa Croce in Florence, contrasts perfectly with this also piece of architectural decoration, the boss from a Seljuk madrasa in Anatolia. In Islam, God has no physical form. God has no physical extension. God has no gender, no face, no beard, no hands, no feet. As Musa commented in the great parable written by Mevlana, not even feet has God. God instead can't possibly be pictured in any way because God hasn't a body, hasn't an image. There is no way to make God into a picture. In the way that in Christianity it's pretty easy to make God into a picture. Michelangelo did it magnificently. Instead, in Islam, how you picture, image, evoke, respond to the presence of God is through geometry. The geometric image, perfect in its extension, perfect in its order, the geometric image is an evocation of the presence and power of God. That's the norm in Islam. So in Islam, there is a centrality of God's word much beyond any centrality of man's creations or God's creatures. What this meant, historically speaking, is that the extreme monotheism, the puristic monotheism of Islam, offered an immediate challenge to all representational systems. When Islam, in Muslim hands, first moved north into Anatolia and led very quickly to the investment of Constantinople, there was, in the Byzantine Christian tradition, a great abundance of human imagery. The immediate response was iconoclasm. That is, until the Muslim arrival in Anatolia, there was a complete predominance of beautiful images of human beings, some of them saints, some of them not. But those human beings were pictured again and again and again, and suddenly they were absent. You're seeing a perfect material document of that absence in the Tokala Kalise from Cappadocia. You can see that the underlying paint in color is a series of human images in narrative form. And then over that suddenly was plastered, white plaster, on which there were no more images, but only the sign of the cross. That is, in two phases, the proposition of representation was eliminated from Eastern Christianity and replaced by the purity of the sign of the cross. The material culture evidence couldn't be clearer, and I'm personally gratified that Judith Herron, the great Byzantinist, has recently embraced the proposition that the reason for iconoclasm in early Christianity was the sudden and almost frightening purity of the monotheistic Islamic alternative. By the 9th century, iconoclasm was over. But iconoclasm wasn't entirely over. The kind of relic of the Islamic challenge was present in the fact that the Eastern Church centered upon the idea of an icon, the Mother of God from the little Kora church right by the great walls of Istanbul, centered upon the icon, but the icon was held away from naturalism. The clearest instance of its being held away is the way that from this moment on in the Eastern Church, there is no sculpture at all. Whereas in the Western Church, sculpture continues. You're looking at Our Lady of the Rosary from the Dominican Church in Salvador. That is, there's a first remarkable contrast. The consequence of the Muslim presence is that there's a difference between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, and the Western Church, farther away from the East and nearer to the power of Rome, was willing to embrace a higher degree of naturalism. The second great phase of iconoclasm began with the sack of Rome in 1527. It followed through the rise of Protestantism, and it led to the stripping of the altars as so impeccably described by Eamon Duffy. That is, suddenly all those apostles, all those saints that had decorated the interior of Protestant churches were torn up, taken out on the street, and burned. The consequence is perfectly represented by this image, picture of mine, all of them are, a picture of the little church of St. Patrick's in Paracombe in Devonshire. In the 17th century, this 12th century rood screen that you see at the bottom that separates the nave from the chancel, that rood screen used to be surmounted, of course, by a rood, that is to say, a carved image of Christ on the cross. But in the 17th century, that image was taken down, parish records tell us, taken out in front of the church and burned. It was replaced by the Ten Commandments. That is, it was replaced by a text. This image of a Protestant tradition is then perfectly in contrast with the Catholic image, and that makes exactly Don Yoder's contrastive pair. That is, these contrasts, East-West, Protestant and Catholic, are not a matter of mere difference. They're a matter of exactly the process that Levi-Strauss described in the wonderful book, The Way of the Masks, in which traditions rubbing up against each other recoil away from one another into purity. And so one of those recoils led to the absence of sculpture in the Eastern Church. Another one led to the absence of images of saints in Protestantism. The differences that we can see within Christianity, that is to say, the difference between the Eastern Church and the Western, the difference between Protestant and Catholic churches, is clearer by far at the eastern end of the Mediterranean, at the western end of Asia, where Christianity comes into a recoiling relationship with Islam. The great iconoclastic movements of the 7th and 8th centuries were the first, and it continues all the way to the present, of course. What you're looking at is a perfect Byzantine icon of Christ. It was mosaic put in the walls of Hagia Sophia right after the at last ending of the terrible Fourth Crusade that sent Western Christians driving violently through Eastern Christian lands. When that was finally and at last over, that ending of that violent moment was celebrated by the making of this beautiful icon of Christ on the wall in Hagia Sophia. It perfectly contrasts and impeccably contrasts with this, a Hilie Sharif. That is, in Christianity we expect, however abstractly, an image of a human being. But in Islam, what you have in the Hilie Sharif is in fact a written description of the appearance of the Prophet. It is effectively a calligraphed icon, but it contrasts impeccably with the idea of a facial icon. Calligraphy is the most important and central of all the arts in Islam, but it doesn't mean that the system begins and ends with calligraphy, of course. It's rather finding the center and then moving away from that center. I can be guided very easily by the documents that are available to us that tell us what was true of the past. And in a reliable hadith, it says that the Prophet did not object to representation, and the Prophet didn't object to decoration. But the Prophet did favor the association of artistic work that is both representational and ornamental. He favored its location in the ambit of labor, meaning pretty simply that his vision of art was exactly the opposite of the Western high art vision, where we might favor art for art's sake and favor a kind of idol art that matches the idol rich. The Prophet believed, and Islam follows him, that the most important arts are not pictorial, but in fact are those arts that connect directly to the common uses of everyday life. That is to say, in the West, textiles and ceramics are mere craft. In Islam, textiles and ceramics are high art. What's low art? Picturing people. What's high art? Weaving a carpet. The greatest textile in Islam is certainly the thing that we call an oriental carpet. It's one of the very few objects made by human beings that have been accepted almost universally among humankind. There is no place that you can go and not find oriental carpets. That would have been true in colonial New Mexico as much as it's true in modern Denmark. Everywhere in the world, people accept the great art of Muslim rural women as a human figure, as a human representation, as a human accomplishment. This turnal rug was woven by my friend Nezaheh Erzkan in the village of Ahmetler. Textiles are high art, ceramics are high art. The interesting thing about, let us say, a plate is that the plate is usable but never used. No one would dream of using this plate for use, but the fact is, because it's a plate and not a four-square picture in a frame, because it's a plate, it can refer at least to the proposition of use. So that the key to understanding Islamic art is that it's all connected directly to use, as, for example, Kumaraswamy says all of Indian art is, that the idea of having an art that has no use seems vain and incomprehensible. Instead, art has use. The calligraphed Word of God is certainly a useful guide to life. The beautiful rug is something that warms the feet. The plate is something that you can hang on the wall to direct your orientation in prayer to Mecca. This plate, calligraphic and geometric, was made by Kerim Keçicigil in the city of Kütahya. Kütahya in the mountains of western Turkey is the greatest modern center of Islamic ceramics. In Kütahya, there are 10,000 potters. It's a little bit hard to think about when we think about going into the back country and finding the last guy that remembers how the last guy made a pot. When you go into a city where there are 10,000 potters, it's like going into Stoke-on-Trent in 1750. Among these potters, the great masters enter an altered state of consciousness. You're looking over the shoulder of Hakka Ermumju. When Hakka goes into a state and can work, he can't possibly be bothered by the rest of the world, so he leaves this world and goes into a different place where he says he feels the hand of God, though God has no hand on the back of his hand guiding his geometric designs. The great masters go into this state and they create in three important semantic varieties. And these are the normal varieties of Islamic art. This is Kamil Chavdar. He is a Sufi and a mystic, and he's holding a Sufi and mystic prayer. He's also made in Kütahya a calligraphed plate. That's semantic variety number 1, calligraphy. The great master of our time in the calligraphic tradition was made by and designed by Nurten Shahin. It has at the middle the Basmala, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, the opening formula of the Holy Quran. It's then surrounded by a glorious symmetrical array of rumis, as they're called. And Nurten made this plate so that it could be positioned above the door, so that every time you leave, you go out into the chaos in the name of a merciful God. This is a formula that it is said that the artists who write it are blessed, and Nurten is certainly blessed as an artist. She made this plate, and this plate has taken over her city. The second semantic variety is geometric. This is Kadriya Tosun, a young master of the geometric form, with a plate of her own design, in the way that Nurten's was a plate of her own design. The master of her particular workshop, Ibrahim Erder, made this great geometric plate. Now remember, I'm talking about a city with 10,000 potters. I'm talking about a city in which there are about 3 million pieces of pottery made a year. So I'm not talking about rare pieces, I'm talking about these are the objects that are made by the great artists of Kütahya for the other people, not only of Turkey, but for the entire Middle East. This is the place where Islamic ceramics come from in our day. I mean today, these are young people. Ibrahim made this design of the interlocked star in the pattern that's normally found on the front doors of mosques. The geometric pattern, I've already hinted, but this is exactly the way that Ibrahim sees it, is what this plate represents in centered design that will go on to infinity. Watch it go. That this idea of a centered infinity describes the power of God from the molecular to the cosmic level. At every level that you can imagine, from the most minute to the most gigantic, what you find ultimately in the Islamic consciousness is a perfect emblem of the power of the one God. The third variety of semantic work, not only in the city of Kütahya, not only in ceramics, but generally in Islam, is floral. This is Mehmet Gürsoy, great master who I'm so proud that my writing about him has led to him being a UNESCO Living Artist Treasure of the World. Ah, Mehmet, you do the best you can, and here it is. He makes çiçekli floral designs. But the çiçekli floral design, Mehmet would guide you through its understanding like this. First of all, look at the flowers. Those are not real flowers. We're not confused. We're not making a picture out of nature. This has got nothing to do with the flowers that grow and die along the roadside. These flowers are symbolic, and what are they symbolic of? Human beings. Are there no human beings in Islamic art? Human beings are everywhere if you realize that flowers are their symbol. But the fact the flower is used for a very simple reason, and that is that we're not talking about the mere bodies of people. Who cares? We're talking about their eternal souls. So what the flowers represent, I'm not interpreting, this is Mehmet Gürsoy. What the flowers represent are the souls of human beings, and what you can see about those souls is that they're different. Some are big and some are small. Some are male and some are female. Some are black and some are white. Some are native, some are foreign. They're big and small, they're all different sizes, but all those differences flower out of the root at the bottom of the design, the tuft of grass that you see, which is a symbol of God's will. That is, what this plate is saying to you is that the diversity of humankind is the consequence of the existence of God's ordering mind, God's ordering power. And all that diversity then springs out of a single root, that is, all the differences among us are the consequence of God's design. Then we rise, each of us, some big, some small, some rich, some poor. We rise, all of us, through the winds of chance, and then we are held in the perfect circle of God's love. The whole argument of this plate is that we are all of us born different, and therefore we should learn to harmonize like the flowers and to rest, each one of us, in the perfect circle of a loving God. Where I complete my story is where it's most distinctly different. I've moved from minor differences within Christianity to a stronger difference between Christianity and Islam, and now find the perfection of Don Yoder's contrast of the textual and the imaged in South Asia. That is, we paused in West Asia, now we're heading to South Asia. And where I've spent my time in South Asia, and spent it for exactly this reason, is in Bangladesh, because it's exactly there where both Muslim and Hindu arts thrive. That is, the reason for my being for a decade in Bangladesh is quite simply this is the place where the world's most different artistic traditions live comfortably one with the other. The Muslim artistic traditions of Bangladesh are very different in their appearance from those of Turkey, but they're not different in their categories. What you have is calligraphy, and what you have is geometry, and what you have is flowers. This is Nurul Alam Talukdar, and he's holding with great pride his carving of the Kalime Shahadat, that is to say, the profession of faith in Islam. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. My point in showing you Nurul Aslam is just to say that were I to now digress into a long discourse on the Muslim arts of Bangladesh, I would come to exactly the conclusions that I've already come to in talking to you about Turkish ceramics. The contrast, and this is what I'm after, the contrast is with Hinduism. A great Hindu artist like Babulal Pal is not a maker of, certainly not a maker of calligraphy. He's not a maker of geometry. He's not a maker of flowers. He's a maker of murtis. He's a maker of images of the bodies of God. In the village of Kamarpara, where he lives, Babulal made this particular image for his own devotion. I like to place it not far from those Turkish plates to say that its rhetoric is exactly the same rhetoric that you've seen in those plates. What you're looking at is Radha and Krishna. But what you're supposed to do if you're in the devotional space of Babulal Pal is you're supposed to look at Radha. And Radha looks at Krishna, and Krishna looks at you. And the two of them bring you into a circle of three people, you the devotee and they the gods, and what they're doing is drawing you into the circle of love. The central proposition of Islam is certainly a text, the Holy Quran. The central proposition of Hinduism is an image. In fact, it's two images. In fact, it's about 1 million images, all of them different and all of them telling a different story. There is no basic text. Instead, what there is the murti. And the murti is the only thing that can properly lead us, in my opinion, into an understanding of not only Hinduism, but a religion like Hinduism. You're looking at an image of a very, not a famous goddess at all, called Jagadhatri. It's made by my friend Haripada Pal, and it's in his shop. Cramped, damp shop in Shakari Bazaar in downtown Dhaka. Dhaka will be pretty soon the biggest city in the world, so we're not talking about rare and country things. But here's Haripada's image. And I put it there to just say this about the murti, that desperate to make sense of religions in familiar terms, generally I find that writings, and I've read a great deal of them, that try to describe to you what Hinduism is about, try to reformulate Hinduism ultimately on a Christian model, and ultimately on a textual model. But texts are beside the point. What's central to the point is the image, and that image is the murti. So if you read, you will be told that Hinduism is somehow governed by 3 male deities, a kind of trinity. It's a familiar number from another religion. The proposition of male deities also plenty familiar. But let me tell you that wonderful pattern that you read about will fail on the ground, and it'll certainly fail in Bengal. Because in Bengal, the central deity, without question, is not male at all, but it's Devi, the goddess. The goddess is certainly the primary deity of Eastern Hinduism. The goddess appears in different forms. She appears most profoundly in the form of Durga. This is Durga. Durga is installed for puja, for great worships, just about this time in the fall, and also very early in the spring. The spring festival is small, the fall festival is vast, but in both cases, balancing themselves on either side of the year, there are moments when people get together. They take a clay image of Durga, they install it, they worship it for a brief period, and then they sacrifice it. Durga's story is a profound one. It's exactly parallel to the Ramayana that is so important in India proper. Durga's story is this, that before order came upon the world, and I'd like to think just perfectly about one of those Muslim geometric images of perfect order, before perfect order was possible on the face of the earth, there was a war, a constant war between the demons and the gods, like the gods and the titans of classic antiquity. So the gods and the demons were at war, and there was a terrible demon called the buffalo demon who threatened the place where the gods lived. The gods gathered and realized that there was no one of them who was powerful enough to resist the buffalo demon, and that the only way that they could possibly survive was to invest Devi, the goddess, with all the powers of all the gods. And so she has 10 arms, which is more than any of the other deities, because what the number of arms does is indicate the power of the deity. She has 10 arms, and the buffalo demon attacked her, and he attacked her in different forms, but every form that he attacked her in, she suavely, nonchalantly, without breaking a sweat, destroyed the buffalo demon. What you're seeing, and what you see in all images of Durga, is the very last moment. The last moment when the buffalo demon, the buffalo itself is already dead. The lion, which is the Vahana of the goddess, is enraged. And the poor old buffalo demon is the last of the titans, the last of the demons to threaten the gods, and she just nonchalantly slaughters him. That's the moment at which the order that we share, the order of our world, came into being. Before this, there was chaos because the titans, the demons, were not trustworthy. But now the gods are in control, and we can worship the person who gave us this control, that is, who gave us the kind of ordering power that the Muslim sees in a geometric order. That's Durga's gift to us. What she has given to us is the order that a night to sleep in, a day to wake up, food, cattle, all those things that make life possible are the direct consequence of the absence of the demon. The absence of the demon is Ravan in the Ramayana. The absence of demon is the absence of the demon is the old buffalo demon in eastern Bengal. But this is effectively the picture of the beginning of the order that we inhabit. And it's all due to the goddess Durga. Durga in her representation, that was a representation by Shankar Dar from the Dakeshwari Mandir, Durga is always accompanied by her children, most notably Ganesh, the Lord of Beginnings, but also her son Kartik, who is the Lord of War, and more importantly by her daughter Saraswati, who is the goddess of wisdom, and Lakshmi, who's the goddess of wealth. Durga, the goddess in power, is the prime deity of Bengal. She is the one that matters the most. But the Devi is very diverse and very powerful, so she not only appears in the world powerfully as Durga, she appears in the world in rage as Kali. It's the same Devi, but she's in different moods. In a good mood and a powerful mood, she's Durga. In a submissive and wifely mood, she's Parvati. But in a rage, she is Kali. Kali decided one day to destroy evil. She went all through the world destroying evil, but the trouble is that Kali was so enraged and held the sword, unfortunately, in her left hand, that she began not only to destroy all the evil in the world, but destroy literally everything in the world. She was racing along until she stepped on Shiva, her husband. Suddenly she realized that that was wrong to step on your husband. Her tongue dropped out of her mouth. The tongue lolling out of her mouth is a sign of her awareness. With her tongue out of her mouth, then she becomes not just Kali, she becomes Shama Kali. And Shama Kali still has the sword in her left hand. She's not as good as Raksha Kali, who has the sword in her right hand, but Shama Kali has the sword in her left hand, but she's stepping on Shiva and her tongue is lolling out. She's aware, this is the Kali that you want to offer goods to. This is the Kali that will help you. This is the Kali that you can approach in prayer. I understand the murtis, the deities, and the nature of Hinduism almost entirely from this man, Horipada Pal. Horipada was trained as a sculptor by his grandfather, Naroda Prasad Pal, in the village of Norpara. He wanted to become a sculptor, so he went east to Tripura and Calcutta. He went west. He came back. He settled in Dhaka and became the greatest sculptor in all of Bangladesh. I sit at his feet. We hold hands. I saw him just last year. We hug a lot. He was trained by a great mystic, and he understands things far beyond what is normal. And one of the things that he understands is that there is a book called the Shastra Shilpa Shastra, that's supposed to tell you how to make sculpture. He said it's utterly worthless. It was written by very learned men who had no idea about how to make a statue, and so the only way that you can understand how to make a murti is to study with another maker of murtis. That is, the genius of the Hindu religion has not passed down from Brahmin to Brahmin on text. It's passed down from working sculptor to working sculptor who work in the mud. The images that are made, the murtis that are made by, this is Shumanta Pal, you're looking over his shoulder in the village of Kagajipara, and he's making an image of the goddess Saraswati. This is the head of Vishnu in the hands of Horipada Pal. Shumanta makes the statue because that's how he was told to make it, but the man who understands is Horipada Pal. He begins with a mantra of praise. You praise the god, you praise the goddess, you direct your attention entirely through poetry to a particular deity above, and slowly but surely that deity comes into your brain, and you make, not on a piece of imagination, not something you've dreamed up, instead, you make a direct revelation of the divine that has appeared in your mind. You don't have to wonder what the goddess looks like because the goddess has come down out of the sky, occupied your brain, and she is instructing you exactly what she looks like. That's the first step. The second step is that you begin to work the clay. The idea of the divine is scattered through the universe. It's called Atma. You're used to the word because you know Mahatma as a name for Gandhi, the name that he was given by Rabindranath Tagore. It means great soul, Mahatma. Atma is everywhere. There's Atma in this table, there's Atma in this clock, there's no Atma whatsoever in this digital technology, but there's Atma on the seat you're sitting on. There's Atma everywhere else. And there's Atma in the body. So that if you take clay, there's Atma in the clay. And your hands in the effort of making an image are seeking into that clay for that image. And in your body, there is Atma. And what happens as you massage the clay is that the Atma in your body ejaculates through your fingertips into the Atma that's in the clay, and that conjunction, that birth of power, is the power that lies inside the murti. It must be protected. Its vehicle is dampness. It can't be burned. And what you make then is a statue. The statue is painted. The statue is taken and installed for puja. This is the Dakeshwari Mandir. This is the goddess Saraswati, the goddess of wisdom, the goddess that all of us intellectuals would naturally follow were we Hindus. And what happens is exactly a repetition of the creation of the image itself. That is, you begin with a mantra of praise. When the mantra of praise attaches, finds at last the goddess, she comes down out of the sky. She lands in the mud statue that you've made, that Horipada Pal has made. She lands in that statue and waits. Then you, the devotee, begin to sing, and you sing those same mantras of praise. The same mantras of praise that Horipada used to make the statue, or the mantras of praise that the Brahmin uses to bring the goddess down, are the mantras of praise that you use to make a connection. You make the connection then through sound, through song, through music. In the beginning was the sound Om. That's the original musical note. That musical note is the note that you establish to make a connection between yourself and the deity who is not the statue, but inside the statue, inside the husk of that statue. Then you connect through sight, through darshan. You look hard at the big eyes and the big head of the goddess, and she looks hard back at you. And when eyes connect, then dampness connects. The dampness that's in the body of the statue connects to the dampness that's in your body. Dampness flows to connect. At that point, you can dine with the deity. She eats flowers, you eat sweet prasad, and you can make a request. That's the reason for the deity, is that she comes, you make a request, and then she's gone. She stays only a very short time. Some deities 3 days, some 4, some 7, but it's all written down in books, and the Brahmins know when it happens. And then at the very end of the time when the deity leaves, you feed her, and then you take the murti out. And you take the murti to the riverside and throw it in the water. Some deities are there for a week, some for a day or two. This is Mahadev. He's bobbing on the surface of the Buriganga. About a minute, and he's gone. He wasn't made of fired clay, he was made of unfired clay, so that he melts into the silt of the rivers, and the rivers go on rolling, and they take that silt downstream, and downstream somebody takes that silt out of that river, and they use that silt, that clay, to model another image of the deity. The point of the sacrifice of the deity is to remind you of the proposition of reincarnation. That is to say, interestingly, and it's a terrible problem for art history, there are, of the greatest works of art in Bengal, there are no examples. None. The only way that you can know about the art of Bengal is to be there with a camera, attending the puja, and taking the photograph. Because they're all sacrificed, because not to be sacrificed would be a dishonor to the deity, and to be sacrificed releases the clay that's in the deity to become a part of the endless cycle of the reincarnation of the gods. I sketched the situation in East Bengal. My point now is going to be, I think, made in one example very clear, that the Hinduist propositions that manage the world in Bengal are remarkably unlike those in Tamil Nadu. That is, we move from northeastern India, effectively Bangladesh, down to the very tippy end of that pointed subcontinent. You can picture it in your map. We're way down at the end, and there in the city of Madurai, there is the Monocacy Temple. Almost any traveler to India knows of the Taj Mahal. But if you're a Hindu traveler in India, the Monocacy Temple rivals the Taj Mahal in greatness. Those are the two great architectural monuments. You certainly can picture the Taj Mahal in your mind. You can't probably picture the Monocacy Temple unless you have this slide, where you're looking at one of the gopuras of the Monocacy Temple. There are 5 big ones and 8 small ones. The temple itself is 1,000 years old. And on those gopuras, there are something like 7,000 life-size sculptures of Hindu deities, an almost unbelievable richness of visual imagery. They constantly have to be worked on. I say that the temple is 1,000 years old, but the temple is also brand new because there are sculptors. This is Pichai Vela, the man that I met and learned from. There are sculptors who are constantly at work in making statues to put up for the ones that are destroyed. There's a constant cycling, an endless cycling of statues that come through the hands of the great sculptors and end up on the gopuras of the Monocacy Temple. The images on the temple are not in any narrative order. They're not in any order at all that I can tell. But the interesting thing about those images is that you can tell yourselves stories with them, because you can pick through the thousands of statues that you see and locate exactly those that will tell you the key story of the Monocacy Temple. And that key story is this. Meenakshi, another form of Devi, the goddess, Meenakshi was born with 3 breasts. The 3rd breast, the middle one, was assigned to her of her being irregular, not normal. She needed to work through the world in order to make herself normal, and she made herself normal Kali style by becoming violent, absolutely violent. And what she did is she began way down at the point of southern India and started moving north, and what she did was kill men. It's exactly what she did. You can see that she has the qualities of Kali, but even more arms and more anger and more fury. And so she destroyed males until she got all the way up to the Himalayas. And you may remember that the Bengal story is that Kali was enraged along the path, and she stepped on Shiva, and suddenly Shiva changed her mind about her direction, her tongue hung out, and she became a compassionate deity instead of a violent deity. What happened to Meenakshi is that she went all the way up to the Himalayas, and when she got up to the Himalayas, there was Shiva, kind of a hippie, sitting and not paying any attention to anything. And Kali, instead of destroying him as she had done with all the other males, she was kind of attracted. Complacent, decent guy, might make a nice husband, who knows, he's kind of cute. She liked him. And so instead of murdering him on the spot, which she'd done to all the rest of the males of the subcontinent, what she did was say, I challenge you to a dancing contest. Now this is an altogether less violent act than simply slicing his throat. And so they had that dancing contest. Well, during the contest, Shiva kicked an earring off his ear. He swept down with his foot, picked the earring up, and put it back in his ear. Meenakshi looked at it and said, I can do that, but it's a stupid thing to do. It's really ugly. I really have too much self-respect to do anything as idiotic as that. You win the dancing contest. The consequence of that was the unification of the distinct cults of Hinduism. That is to say, Meenakshi's brother, Vishnu, gave her in marriage to Shiva. She became married, and she became not complacent, she was power itself, so powerful that you can't actually look Meenakshi in the eye. It's not possible. You'll freeze and die immediately, simply by her eyes, simply by her gaze. But Shiva is a different proposition. With Shiva, she had a child, Ganesh. Shiva, Meenakshi, and Ganesh make the Holy Family. And that Holy Family is found in the great big temple of Meenakshi. It's found in little temples, it's found in street shrines, and it is the governing image of South India. That is to say, the governing image clearly of Bengal, of modern Bangladesh, is the image of Durga killing the buffalo demon. But the governing demon of southern India, this neighborhood of Tamil Nadu, is clearly the Holy Family, that is to say Shiva, Meenakshi, who would be called Parvati in North India, their son Ganesh, and their son Murugan, who would be called Kartik in East India. This is the unification of the distinct cults, a male and female cult, Devi uniting with Shiva, with the blessing of Vishnu, makes for a perfectly complete image of Hindu unity. All you got to do is go outside of the city. Outside of the city, all of a sudden, every religious event looks entirely different. Out in the countryside, there are no statues at all of the gods. The gods are reduced to rocks, rocks that symbolize their presence. And what you see are gigantic horses. And those horses are made as gifts to the god Ayanar, who has not been mentioned and isn't mentioned hardly in any book on Hinduism at all. That you make these gigantic horses for Ayanar, among the biggest ceramic things that have ever been made in world history. And Ayanar is the main deity in the countryside. As it would be as though, you can imagine how different it would be to have one religion governing the city, and then go out into the countryside and find another entire different religion, except this isn't a different religion, this is just a different strand of Hinduism. I was very interested to find the center of this religion, and I found somebody who would lead me there, across a long path and up a hill, and finally to the great temple of the god Ayanar. exact opposite of the temple of Meenakshi, gigantic, made of masonry. This is 4 wooden posts stuck in the ground with a thatched roof. It's not right, and therefore I didn't break any rules and took no pictures, but the fact is, oh no. Well, you know, that's kind of curious, isn't it? Here ought to be a picture of the god Ayanar with his 2 wives. But the digital machinery has swallowed it up. Don't worry about it, honey. We're going to, no, it's quite all right. You get the picture, and you'll see it. But so behind the little temple, there's the pictures of the god who is worshipped in the temple, and out front, thousands upon thousands of horses and elephants, centuries of statues of the vehicles that Ayanar, the god, rode. The priest of the temple is not a Brahmin, but a potter, Aligar Chettiar. And Aligar Chettiar is not only the man who leads the services in the temple, he's the man who makes the images. This is Aligar beginning an image of the god Ayanar with his 2 wives. He finishes the work with his son-in-law Krishnan. And here's Aligar Chettiar, the priest of the temple, at the end of the day, with his statue that he's made, while I've watched, of Ayanar and his 2 wives. Those images will be burned outdoors in exactly the same style that's used by Pueblo potters here. Then they'll be installed in the temple for 1 year and 1 year only. And then they'll be just thrown out in the fields around to gather among all the ceramic debris that has been released to the elements. Very different than sacrificing in water, but nonetheless in exactly the same way, a proposition of something impermanent in the middle of something so permanent as a religious proposition. Well, I'm at the end, but I could keep going. I could take you to northern India, to Benares, the Hindu Mecca, the best place to die. I could go to the Jaipur Murti Bandar, where they carve great statues of Hindu deities, where they make murtis out of marble and not clay, where the great masters, curiously, are not the carvers at all, but people like Sindranath Singh who paint those marble statues. I could digress a lot on why it is in Shiva's city that the most important of all the images that are made by the makers of images in the city of Benares are in fact of Hanuman. Well, Hanuman was the one who helped Ram in defeating Ravan in the Ramayana. So Hanuman is a reference to the same beginning of the contemporary order and the ending of the order of the demons, like Durga. But why Hanuman? Well, we talked to a lot of people and got a lot of answers. Like I say, I could keep going on. I also really ought to keep going on, because what I've done is I've just shown you 2 long, 1 short examples of the making of Hindu images, and what you see is an amazing difference in everything among them all, certain similarities, but basically a tremendous amount of differences. And the truth is that were I to teach myself about Hinduism, I'd have to go to every region of India. Indeed, I'd have to go to every town. I'd have to go to every village. I'd have to go to every temple. Indeed, I would have to interview. Remember, there's over 1 billion people in India. I would have to interview every Hindu. It's not possible. But from these examples, I hope you get a little idea of it. I could go on, but the fact is my point is made. My point is pretty simple. I've taken, clearly before a group of friends that might not be averse to the argument, I've taken my stand against the obsession with texts in religious studies. And I would say, as a result of all this work, that it's always the case that material culture offers amplifying evidence to a study of religion. That's even true in the most orderly and text-centered of all the religions. You're looking up into the dome of the Atiq Ali Mosque. But what I really have been driving at is that in the open, in the inclusive, in the expansive religions, like Hinduism, like the ancient religions of Greece and Rome, like the native religions of West Africa, in those religions, you don't have any alternative but to spend time thinking about material culture. That is to say, to try to understand such religions without central attention to the proposition of the image is sheer folly. My second point is this: the greatest art of the world, past, present, finer folk, has all been connected to religion. One of the reasons for that is that it provides such good work for the worker. The worker does something that's completely fulfilling in of itself, and yet is always wanted by the person to whom it will go. It's always useful and always beautiful. The religious work completely eliminates the problem of the war of craft and art, the war of use and beauty. Religious art is always beautiful, always useful, always satisfying to its maker, always useful to the person who uses it. A second and powerful proposition about religious art is that it's always a matter of devotion and always a matter of collaboration. You just can't do it alone. You're looking at the workshop of Edival Rosas in Salvador Bahia in Brazil. He's at work with his mates, with his apprentices, on a gigantic image of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception that will be installed in a church. This is not a picture from the 19th century. This is a picture from a couple of years ago. We spent time with Edival only 10 days ago in Salvador. But when he is working, he's not only making. When he's working, he's not only an artist, he's always a teacher. And the people with whom he works are always his students. So that every act of the making of religious art is not only an act self-satisfying, not only an act that's useful to another person, it's also an act inevitably of a matter of giving and taking, teaching and learning, making together. Maybe this was Edival. We're still messed up. At the end of it, this is the kind of rhetorical flourish. At the end of it, I would say that what's interesting to me, in having spent so much time with artists who make religious things the world over, is that all doctrinal differences are dissolved entirely in the act of making. That in the aspiration and in the action of creation, it really doesn't matter what the religion it is. It only matters that it's your religion and that somebody else shares it. So ultimately there isn't, finally, and this is the kind of contradiction to the proposition of contrast that's governed this entire screed, ultimately there isn't a final difference between Nurten Shaheen, Muslim, in the city of Kütahya, holding up her geometric plate that images the infinite power of the one God, and Murugan in Tamil Nadu with his image, a Hindu man of Ayanar. At last what they've got is good work to do, the best thing a human being can have. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We have a respondent tonight. Dr. Leonard Premiano is going to be the response tonight, and we'll have time for some questions at the end. I'm going to introduce Leonard now. He's chair and professor of religious studies and co-director of the honors program at Cabrini College. He served as the developer and curator of Cabrini's religious folk popular liturgical arts collection since its inception in 2002. He has currently curated an exhibition of his personal collection of Italian ex voto paintings, graces received, painted in metal ex votos from Italy, which is will be traveling to Indiana University next year. Leonard is a fellow of the American Folklore Society and has served on the executive board of AFS. Like Henry, Leonard is a distinguished teacher. He's a recipient of the Limbach Award for Distinguished Teaching at Cabrini College, and this year a recipient of the Kennedy Center Stephen Sondheim Inspirational Teacher Award in 2014. And he has a letter from Stephen Sondheim, too.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Maggie. Good evening, folklorists. And peace, everyone.
Peace.
Peace, everyone.
Peace.
For some of you may have heard me say this before, but for others of you that have not encountered someone like me before with this particular speech pattern, I do want to say that I never smoked a day in my life. That's number one. Number two, I'm not currently dying. Would someone who is currently dying wear this coat? And most importantly, it does not hurt me to talk. I could go on for hours. I especially, of course, want to thank Henry Glassie for another inspirational talk. Can we give him another round of applause? I think I can say theologically, Henry, that it was another immaculate conception. I'm a religious studies professor, I can say that. Ladies and gentlemen, as some of you might know, I've been studying the peace mission movement of Father and Mother Divine for several years now. One of the hallmarks of their weekly ritualizing is the celebration of the Holy Communion banquet service, which I enjoy with them at Father and Mother Divine's estate, known as Woodmont in Gladwin, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Philadelphia, and about 15 minutes from the campus of Cabrini College. On such occasions, many courses of beautifully prepared foods are served to a table filled with enthusiastic guests. After the immaculately cleaned lettuces and enormous heirloom tomatoes, great varieties of other cut salad vegetables are served. Warm breads next appear, and then at least 5 wonderfully cooked vegetables, such as huge, spotless white cauliflower, mixed wild and brown rices, or organic and green and wax beans from the Peace Mission garden. Those are also served. Then come meats and fish courses, including perfectly baked chicken, wild salmon, and always some sort of tofu or tempeh dish with appropriate gravies. More breads and muffins follow, accompanied by homemade organic Woodmont jam. Then it is time for dessert. At least 5, including homemade fruit pies, luscious cakes, gelatins, and ice cream molded into butterflies or hearts or Liberty Bells. One is truly satisfied by this meal, and that is exactly the effect that Father Divine wanted, a physical and he hoped spiritual sense of satisfaction. Now, what does any of this description have to do with Professor Glassie's Don Yoder lecture? Well, I will tell you. On special Peace Mission holy days, these banquet services, after all of this incredible food have been served, are punctuated with a simple tray of mixed nuts for the congregation to indulge in one more gustatory experience. But I ask you, after the stuffed lobster, after the butter molded into the shape of a lily, and after the cream puffs formed delicately into the shape of swans, are those mixed nuts really necessary? Well, folklorists, this evening, I feel like that tray of mixed nuts. For after Henry Glassie's sterling lecture and magnificent images, is a response by me really necessary? When Maggie and I asked Henry to be the Yoder lecturer, I actually reflected back on a paper that I once was going to write as a graduate student at Penn on the subject of religion in the work of Henry Glassie. At that time, patterned in the material culture of the eastern United States, folk housing in Middle Virginia, all silver and no brass, and passing the diamond vellum unknown had been published, as well as the spirit of folk art. After examining first the indices of these volumes, and then the chapters themselves, I came to the conclusion that I could not write the paper because Henry seemingly deliberately avoided whenever he could in-depth discussions of religious belief and practices in the lives of his informants or related to particular material culture. The Spirit of Folk Art, a book on the Gerard collection at the International Museum of Folk Art here in Santa Fe, filled with religious images. The book has only 6 or 7 references to religion in its index. I pondered the question, how could Henry not be interested in the religious nature of his people or their material? It has taken me many years to understand that the aspect of religion that Henry is not very interested in is the structures, regulations, and culture of religious institutions, what Father Divine used to wonderfully call churchianity, in reference to Christian churches. But Henry is very interested in the way religion influences the creativity of everyday believers who become artists, as we have heard in his Yoder lecture this evening. I have come to this conclusion after journeying with him through his books that follow those that he produced in his pen Folklore incarnation. I might add, these books are not about Western culture, for these books taught me how he appreciated religion in the lives of his many artful friends and acquaintances. As we know when reading a Glassie book, the endnotes contained as many gems of knowledge as does the text itself. And in The Potter's Art, Henry elaborates in a note to page 77 about the artisans of Turkey, and he says, quote, "There are thinkers in consumer societies who wish to steal art from its creators, reducing the aesthetic to a matter of the beholder's taste, and defining art in terms of their own reactions. But I believe that art is defined by the gift made to materials by the creator in the instant of concentration, and that the observer's responsibility is not to react positively or negatively in line with a supposedly refined sensibility, but to work, learning to appreciate the artist's gift, however strange it might at first appear," is on page 129. I think that this emphasis on the individual artist and the world he or she creates in and through their art, which at times can be very religious, gives us a clue as to how Henry sees religion and how it works for folk artists and in folk art. Henry's ideas about life, religion, and artfulness are ultimately, to me, a rich expression, and this is the argument that I'm offering for your consideration this evening, a rich expression of an understanding of philosophical existentialism, which runs through Enrique Glassie's work, which he has transformed into what I would call a folkloristic existentialism with an accompanying phenomenology. And the comparative work that he presents today in this lecture offers us, I think, a wonderful example of his folkloristic existentialism applied to the religious lives of artful people. Existentialism is the name of a philosophical movement that emerged shortly after World War II in Germany, spread to France and America, and reached its zenith in the late 40s and 50s. Quite diverse so far as its specific teachings are concerned, it is united more by its common concerns. Although no general description of existentialism exactly fits any one exponent of it, the movement may be characterized roughly as follows, and I owe these ideas to another Penn professor of mine, Van Harvey, in the Religious Studies Department. Existentialism begins with the conviction that Western philosophy, since the Greeks, has been more preoccupied with the idea of essence, the general and universal features of anything, rather than with concrete, individual human experience, the former being counted more real because unchanging than the latter. Consequently, Western philosophy has been intellectualistic and rationalistic. Existentialism would further note that such philosophy has not only been irrelevant so far as illuminating life is concerned, but has actually obscured the truth about human existence. The fundamental categories of classical philosophy, soul, virtue, substance, accidents, essence, and existence are all impersonal. In short, they fail to indicate the historical nature of human existence and fail to do justice to the basic character of human life as change, consciousness, process, movement, passion, and decision. Oh my, all of these are interests of folklorists, of folkloristic ethnography, and of folkloristic existentialism found in the work of Henry Glassie. Existentialism had a profound impact on the so-called neo-reformed theologians in Protestantism, such men as the early Karl Barth, Rudolf Bultmann, Friedrich Gorgarten, Emil Brunner, Paul Tillich, and Reinhold Niebuhr, as well as some Roman Catholic philosophers and theologians such as Gabriel Marcel and the Jesuit Karl Rahner. Although these theologians have quite diverse positions, they share in common the existential attack on the language of substance and soul as a way of talking about humans, and hence are able to interpret faith and religiosity in different terms. The self, they argue, is a unity of radical freedom and limitedness, and faith or religiosity is the acceptance of this paradoxical unity. But faith or religiosity is not the possession of a creed or a doctrine, nor is it belief. It is rather the decision to be oneself as this person in this situation, a decision that must be made again and again. This decision is made possible by the gracious and unconditioned acceptance of humans by God and of God by humans, which enables men and women to have the courage to be themselves. The root of existentialism is an important foundation of contemporary folkloristics, and Henry's folkloristic existentialism naturally leads him to see art as a gift made to materials by the individual creator, in their decision to follow their artistic passions, and in that instant of concentration when religious lives deeply influence their art. In Henry's comparison of artistry of Hindu and Muslim practitioners, a unity of radical freedom and limitedness is expressed, not in the possession of a creed or a doctrine, but rather in the decision to be oneself as an artist in the situation of this life, a decision made possible by the gracious and unconditioned acceptance of God in whatever religious tradition or form by humans, which enables artistic men and women to have the courage to be themselves. In the end, for me, Henry's appreciation of religion, as he demonstrated in this evening's lecture, very much reflects the perspective of the great scholar of comparative religion, Wilfred Cantwell Smith, the author of The Meaning and End of Religion, among other books. Smith, who taught at Harvard Divinity School while I was there, that's a name dropper, would say that no one should write about comparative religion until after many years of field work among various people, so that their sense of the religious could be absorbed and transmitted and translated properly by the scholar of the history of religions. We can see now how Henry artfully compares religious traditions after his many years of traversing the globe, studying carefully individual traditions, and often stopping to reflect on their comparison. That is all I have for you. The mixed nuts have been passed around the table, and in fact, they have spoken. And as Father Divine used to say, it is time to pass out and pass on later to the bar for a cocktail, and pass on to your questions to our leading folklorist and Yoder lecturer, Henry Glassie. Thank you for your attention.
If anyone would like to offer a question or comment, then please come up to the mic. Here. They're stunned. Everyone's stunned. And satiated, too, yes.
Thank you, Henry, for that wonderful talk. I have a very rudimentary question, but I was intrigued by were they marble murtis that were being carved? And how does that relate then to the idea of reincarnation and so on, when the whole idea of the murti is to make it so transient?
It doesn't at all.
Okay. Thank you.
No, it's got... Oh, it's a nice question. It's so easy to, it's wonderful to have a question that really I don't have to answer. The whole point was how different revelations of Hinduism are. It's got no part of the thinking of those people. They're interested in making a permanent statue and they last forever. So you get their wonderful stone carvings from India that are 2,000 years old of these deities, but not in East Bengal. My point is the regional diversity. Not that they are breaking the rule of reincarnation, it's just that in their creation, reincarnation is insignificant. In the East Bengal sculptors, reincarnation is absolutely essential to what they're doing. Similarly, I mean, I do talk too much, but here's a really interesting comparison too. The carvers who make the images of Hanuman in the Jaipur Murti Bandar, and we talked with those people, where does the idea come from? It's just imagination that's based on having seen a lot of statues. But if you ask the East Bengal carver, no, it's the result of my prayer to the God. I received a direct revelation from the divine. So the beginning and end of the sculptures are absolutely different. It's all Hinduism, but they're just absolutely different. That's kind of the point. I mean, that's where I was driving. Yes? No, not at all. But I have mediocre Bengali. And so that in Tamil Nadu I didn't at all, but I was traveling with people that had English, and a lot of people speak English in South India, much more than in East India, because Tamil is not an official, understand the problems of language. But I can't speak with the people in Tamil Nadu at all, but I go with people who can.
Where did you learn the Meenakshi myth? And how many people told you the myth of the Meenakshi?
I didn't hear you.
Meenakshi's myth? Where did you learn the myth of Meenakshi?
One of the kind of lucky things that I have is I've taught all over the world. I taught a course at Kamraj University in that city, in Madurai. And so I was there for a long time and visited the temple constantly, and I visited frequently with people who had the language. And so that it was a matter of lots of people pointing out those statues, because there are thousands and thousands of them. I couldn't at all have gone to that temple and understood that story. But I heard it probably 20 times in different redactions.
Because I did research on Meenakshi. I lived in Madurai for 1 year, but I never heard this version before. And I also did my research on the folk worship of Meenakshi, also the rural worship, so it's a different variation.
I don't know.
The darshan, to see the divine exchange with the deity, actually people want to see that in Meenakshi temple. So you won't die by looking at the goddess.
Yeah.
She's the mother of Meenakshi. So some of the village goddesses are known to be more fierce, but she's actually a loving mother who's believed to watch over the city.
Well, the point of all of this is the diversity of it, and it's interesting. That's very interesting that you didn't hear it. Now, why would that be the case? I have no idea. But I went to the, or maybe this. I don't have any idea whether this is part of the solution. I started with the statues. You see, I began with the images. So my question to people was not, don't tell me about Meenakshi. Who are these people? So basically, my beginning in that particular place, not a place that I spent a long time, but I feel that I understand enough to at least contrast it with Bengal, is that I was interested in the images. I was interested in the sculptors. So I found people like Pichai Veller, and I wanted to find out from them who these images are. So I never asked a question like, what is the story of Meenakshi? I asked a question like, who's that? Who's that? Who's that? And that was where I was led to learning the story, to pick through those statues and tell you the story that I was told constantly. I don't know what difference that is. This diversity is the point.
Henry, I'd really be interested in hearing your thoughts on this idea of folkloristic existentialism and the kind of framing and characterization of your work and your relationship to religion that was so thoughtfully shared in the mixed nut course that we just consumed.
Oh, I could go on and on and on. Leonard is absolutely correct. I would go on farther to say that existentialism is the basis of the thing we call performance theory. Absolutely and without question. Where did performance theory come from? I asked Himes, where did it come from? He fussed around and talked about linguistics, and I said, who, when you were in college, were you reading? Sartre and Camus. All of us were. I'm of that generation. We didn't read those existentialists because we thought we had to read them. They weren't assigned in classes. That was recreational reading, a thing that's disappeared but used to be quite common. And so when I was in high school, if you weren't reading everything about Sartre and Camus, you just were not cool. And so that it got into us, and it got into Himes, and it got into everybody that invented performance theory. So performance theory is nothing but a domestication of the proposition of existentialism. So I think Leonard's exactly right. I mean, I've said things like that. Passing the Time in Ballymenown says, what am I setting out to do? An existential ethnography. And because Sartre asked, define existential, he said, it's human life without religion. And so I accept that, but I started to examine human life without religion and what did human beings in human life teach me, how important religion was to them. I was raised by a very serious leftist father who thought religion was stupid. I wasn't raised in any kind of religious tradition at all. Didn't want religion. I was told about it, and being a good ethnographer, I embraced the proposition. What moves me greatly about religion is that it provides to people a philosophical reason, a philosophical rationale for the description of their behavior. That if people don't have that, they can't, it's very hard for them to articulate what they're doing. But I find very religious people have a resource in whatever religion is theirs. That's why I think Leonard is also right in saying that I don't particularly, I ended it with, on that note, I don't particularly care what religion we're talking about. What I'm interested in is the way that religion provides to artists a whole lot of topics that are worth making art about. Look what's happened to art. I mean, look what's happened to art since Jasper Johns. It's gone to hell in a handbasket. That's exactly what's happened. There are no topics. Jeff Koons is famous for making balloon dogs. What idiocy is that? But if you're in down, out in the countryside in Brazil and people are making Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception, if you're in Tamil Nadu and he's making the statue of Ayanar, that's serious stuff. Not only is he dedicated to the making of that object, but the people are dedicated to receiving it. They put it into their lives. So that instead of it being trivial, so one thing religion does, it provides good topics for art. Another thing that it does, clearly, is it provides a resource that one can use in explaining to other people what you're up to. What am I doing? If I'm making religious art, there's no problem at all in getting somebody who makes religious art to talk deeply and at length about what they're doing. But somebody who lacks that, it's very difficult for them to explain why what they're doing has virtue or why what they're doing has interest. So I didn't want religion. I didn't want any part of it. And then I went to Ballymonone. 11 years with serious Catholic people. Phew, fantastic. I was so moved by the way that Peter Flanagan could talk about life in the way that other people can't. Just the deepest propositions. He had a whole battery of wonderful religious ideas that he could use to explain, not religion, but what he was up to. It's exactly what Leonard, I agree entirely with his analysis of what. And so that then I went off to Turkey, for heaven's sakes. I spent 10 years with Muslims. I've never stopped going to Turkey. And then I went to Bangladesh, and what was exciting? Hinduism. And what did I do next? That was an accident. I, on purpose, went to Japan to learn something about Buddhism. I love spending time in Nigeria to learn about a religion that wasn't any of the so-called great religions. We're in Brazil working with Catholicism. That's just what's interesting. And Candomblé. Not because I care precisely, Leonard's right, that I care precisely about religion. What I care greatly is about human beings and what religion provides to them. If they're artists, it's great topics and an explanatory mechanism. I think that's really quite a wonderful gift by religion. People must want to leave. Yes, you.
This is something that you can answer, but in The World is Flat, Thomas Friedman talks about the importation or exportation of religious icons to Egypt primarily. So the largest number of Buddhists in the world are manufactured now in Egypt and also in China. And so I'm wondering, this is so deeply profound and moving, the work that you've done, and I'm really grateful for it. And I wonder how globalization is impacting this work, and where you might project in your thinking to this craft, to the artisanship, and the relationship between art and religion as these makers are doing it. Does that make sense?
Well, I suppose it depends a little bit on the definition of globalization. Globalization I take to be a fundamentally economic activity. That is, we're talking about worldwide capitalism, and worldwide capitalism will do its best to destroy religion, because worldwide capitalism, religion will always counter the dominance of an economic explanation of things, I think. So if we were to, how far into the future do we have to project? I think that all of us will be dead before the picture I've shown here has changed much. That's what I think. I think statistics are kind of useful. When I quickly said 1 billion people in India, half of those people are basically living without electricity in villages. That is more people, if you take all the people in the United States and all the people in Europe and put them together, that's not a big number as the people who are in India without electricity. So no, I don't think, and furthermore, that's one kind of glib answer, but the fact is numbers matter. The other thing I think is counteractions. There's not a reason in the world why globalization won't produce counteractions. If globalization is bombing Iraq, consider the counteractions that are the result. There's a globalized act. Let's kill a whole lot of Muslim women and children in a big old city and see what it does. It infuriates a whole lot of Muslim people. I don't think that's going to lead to a lessening of religious activity, but probably to an astringent and violent exaggeration of religiosity. Not something of which I'm approving, because it's not honestly what I'm talking about. But here's a tiny little example. We're now doing field work in Brazil. We're interested in Brazilian art, and what's really interesting is that the number of artists who've dedicated themselves to religious art has clearly tremendously increased in the past 15 years. Now, they're not jihadists. They're not murdering people, they're just making statues of Our Lady of this and Our Lady of that. That's what they're doing. But that's their response to globalization. That is to say, it's very interesting to consider what is the consequence of globalization. And I don't think it will necessarily lead to any diminishing of religious activity at all. I wouldn't think so. The forces of globalization would like to eliminate religion, but I think the people who are responding to that extension of globalizing forces have their own ideas about it. And it's really interesting. We've found that, because we've been going to Brazil for a while, more and more of the artists are dedicating themselves to religious art. That's because Catholics are responding to evangelical presence, and that's because religious people of all Christian varieties are responding to what's imagined from the mass media and globalizing forces as a kind of godlessness. I don't know whether we're not in the middle of a kind of neo-counter-reformation in lots of Latin America. I think that's true. I haven't answered your question very well, but I really think that that our attention to change is, I think, ultimately going to be betrayed by some ethnographer 100 years from now who is going to find all of these religious traditions intact and creating with the hands real objects. So my prediction is that globalization will be countered by the very forces that I've tried to celebrate. That is, Nur 10 going into a passionate warp and making the most unbelievably, minutely perfect geometric plate that she can imagine. And I think there'll be a Nur 10 20 years from now in Kütahya that'll be doing the same thing. Sorry that's a bad answer, but...
No, it's great, and thank you all for coming tonight. I think that we just want to thank Henry again, and let us...